What is the horrifying connection between the OG boy band Menudo and the Menendez Brothers? You guys sent me down a rabbit hole, and what I found is far more disturbing than I could have ever imagined. But first, I have to give a trigger warning. This deep dive is going to contain information that is not going to be suitable for certain audiences. The things I'm going to describe are disturbing and will involve topics such as SA, abuse, rape, and attempted suicide, where also the victims of these acts are children. With that being said, viewer discretion is advised. And for legal reasons, I have to say everything I share is alleged. Everyone is innocent until proven guilty. Now, let's get into the video. Menudo was a very popular boy band that was created and managed by a man named Edgardo Diaz in 1977. The first of the Menudo Band consisted of 3 of Edgardo's cousins, Oscar, Carlos, and Ricky, as well as their 2 friends Fernando and Nefty, who were also known as the Salaberry Brothers. This band would go on to be a huge success in the years that would come. And one of the reasons why is because they had this formula known as Forever Young. The formula consisted of the members of Menudo constantly changing because of their golden rule. And that rule was, once you turned 16, your time in the band was over and you're replaced with someone younger. And that is because Menudo's target audience were children. Even today, products marketed to children and teens generate some of the highest profits across industries. And Edgardo Diaz, alongside Posada Records and RCA Records, who they signed with, also knew that as well. Now, in my last video, I misspoke. I said that they could have been an immortal brand, but the truth is, they are one. Even after everything I'm going to explain in this video, the truth is, they are still around and performing today. But instead of Edgardo Diaz being the manager, it is now Mario Lopez partnering with Menudo Records. Now, if you're part of the Latin community or grew up around it, then you know about Menudo and also most likely know about the dark secrets that happened behind the scenes. And I'll be honest, I knew about Menudo, but I didn't know this much about them. And for the ones who are like me, get ready, because this wholesome, humble beginning is about to turn into a horrifying nightmare. In recent years, many former members of Menudo have come out with allegations and claims of a lot of serious things, saying that Edgardo Diaz and the people that he would surround himself with did some very horrible things to them, including abuse, sexual assault, drugging, and rape. And one of the biggest voices right now that is trying to get justice for what happened to them is Roy Rosello. Roy was born on May 1st, 1970 in the district of Rio Piedras, San Juan, Puerto Rico. From a young age, he was very active and had a love for sports. He even played on the junior soccer team for Real Madrid, one of my top favorite teams of all time, by the way. At such a young age, Roy was so talented that his mother would eventually put him in music school, because not only did he have a love for sports, but he had a love for singing and dancing as well. Needless to say, he was really good at it. So good that after one of his performances, he was spotted by Edgardo Diaz. And that is because Edgardo saw a little girl run up to him asking for an autograph as if he was a member of Menudo. Obviously he wasn't, so this immediately caught Edgardo's attention. And naturally, he made arrangements to meet Roy. And during this meeting is where he and his associates made Roy all of these promises. Promises of being famous and having all these amazing things, which at that time any 13-year-old boy would be excited about. But one thing he didn't expect is that all of that would come at a cost. One day, Edgardo showed up to Roy's school and convinced the principal to allow him to take Roy out of class. Edgardo would then take him to his mother's home without Roy's parents knowing. While at the house, Roy details a conversation that he overheard between Edgardo and his mother. And I'm telling you right now, it's disturbing. According to Roy, Edgardo's mother knew what kind of man he was and what he intended to do that night. And although she wasn't happy about it, she turned a blind eye. And because of this, that night, Edgardo violated and raped Roy. Then in the days that came after, would eventually sign him as the newest member of Menudo. One of the most frequent questions I've seen asked is, why would Roy agree to this? And why would the parents allow this to happen? Well, there's one thing that former members have pointed out. Edgardo was known for scouting boys who came from families in need. During that time, Roy knew his family needed the money, so he did it for them. And the things he endured throughout this time is so heartbreaking. And as far as the parents go, they were being groomed to trust Edgardo just as much as the children were. So it's fair to say that some of them actually had no clue what was going on. When Roy finally joined the band, he didn't have much of a warm welcoming. The other boys felt that Edgardo was showing him favoritism by making him a member without even auditioning. And they assumed that this favoritism came from Edgardo and Roy being in a relationship, but they had no idea that it was far from a consensual one. Roy mentioned that performing for his fans who loved and supported Menudo brought him moments of happiness. Once the curtains closed and the lights shut off, he was terrified, knowing exactly what would come next. Throughout this time, Edgardo would go on to violate Roy, and as Menudo's fame grew, the more sinister the situation became, especially when Menudo was trying to make a move to the US market by signing with RCA Records. This is where we find how the dark secrets of Menudo connect with the Menendez brothers. Lyle and Eric Menendez were born on January 10, 1968 and November 27, 1970 on the East Coast. Their father, Jose Menendez, would eventually become an executive at RCA Records. And once he was appointed CEO of Live Entertainment, he moved his family to Calabasas, California. During their time in Calabasas in 1988, Lyle and Eric got in some trouble. They burglarized multiple homes in the neighborhood and stole more than $100,000 in cash and jewelry. And based on what I've read, this is the reason why they ended up in Beverly Hills. After this, for the most part, they were known to be average wealthy teens. But little did anyone know what horrifying things these boys would have to endure behind closed doors at the hands of their father. Eric and Lyle have shared that from a very young age, their father would consistently violate and rape them. And they would also share how it went on for years while their mother turned a blind eye, the exact same way that Edgardo's mother did.
What did I do? Nothing. Thank God. No, I meant you did. You did nothing. You did nothing for yourself. You did nothing for them. And in my opinion, there's a real special place in hell reserved for people that just choose to do nothing.
One of the saddest details I learned while looking into the story is that Eric Menendez had this fixation on eating lemons and ketchup. And it was such a strange thing that he would even get laughed at about it by his other family members. But brace yourself, because what I'm about to tell you is just fucking disgusting within itself. The truth is, he wanted it because he learned that it would take the foul taste out of his mouth from what his father would make him do. And that is how far into that I will describe. And like I said, this continued for years with no one outside of their home ever knowing. But one of the people who had a strong feeling that there was something wrong was Rosello, the day that he was invited to have dinner at the Menendez home. Like I mentioned earlier, during this time, Menudo was trying to expand into the US market with RCA Records. And before any contracts were signed, Edgardo took Roy for a limo ride. And there, he told Roy that he was going to do something that would be a game changer for Menudo. He told him that they are going to have dinner at the president of RCA's house. That's when Jose Menendez gets into the limo. And almost instantaneously, Roy noticed Jose staring at him with this very sinister look on his face. When they all arrived to the house, Roy walked in the front door and saw Eric and Lyle. And one thing that sticks in his memory is how sad their faces looked. He also vividly remembers the negative energy that he felt coming from the house. He just had this uneasy feeling that something bad was going on in there, and he was right. They would eventually go on to have dinner, and during this time, Jose and Edgardo would discuss some business. That's when moments later, Jose offered Roy a glass of wine, telling this 13-year-old boy to drink all of it because it's a very expensive glass of wine. But when he did, Roy shared how it immediately made him feel tired, heavy, like he wasn't himself. Jose and Edgardo drugged him, took him upstairs, and Jose raped him. I'm going to give the warning again because what I'm going to say is going to be even more disturbing. The next morning, Roy woke up in a hotel room and was bleeding. He told Edgardo, but Edgardo did not care. All he said to Roy was that he's going to be fine and he'll be ready to do it again soon. And shortly after this, it was announced that Menudo has signed with RCA Records for $30 million. And this was all credited to Jose Menendez. And not only that, he would also be the new person responsible for choosing each of the new members of the band. And the crazy thing is, even Lyle remembers Roy and what happened to him that day. And he also remembers each of the boys who would come afterwards. This $30 million deal would bring a new era of success for Menudo. And unfortunately, that success made Edgardo a very powerful and connected man in the industry, and especially in Puerto Rico. Around the 90s, little by little, stories would start to come out about Edgardo. And during this time, one of the first to expose him was a man named Bolivar Arellano. Bolivar was a photojournalist, and during the time of Menudo's success, he was on staff for them, as well as the person who opened up Menudo's merch store. Once Edgardo started rubbing him the wrong way, he contacted a number of former members and asked them to reveal what happened to them. Bolivar found out that 9 boys were raped and 7 boys were made to do things to Menudo executives. That is already 16 cases, and I don't even want to imagine how many more that we don't even know about. Bolivar Arellano would go on to spread awareness by appearing on Carmen Jovet's show, and this was a very popular show at the time. She covered the story live with Bolivar sharing his findings, but that's when the police came to try to arrest him, and they were arresting him simply for speaking badly about Edgardo Diaz. Now, instead of actually arresting him, they gave him a summons to appear the next day. And when he and his lawyers did, they waited. But Edgardo and his team never arrived. Now, it turns out Edgardo was across the street waiting for them to leave. Also, he could go in and accuse Bolivar of fleeing. And this master plan actually worked and led to an arrest warrant being put on Bolivar's head. So during this time, Bolivar was invited back to the Carmen Jovet show, and that's where he said he would gladly turn himself in after the show is over. But what do you know, seconds later, the police come to arrest him again, and this time they actually do it. While he was in court, he tried to show them his credentials as a journalist, alongside the proof that what he was saying was not defamation. He had evidence proving that everything he said was true, but they just ignored him. Then they ultimately found him guilty of defamation and told him that he had to apologize to not only Edgardo Diaz, but also the company for making these false claims. And unfortunately, after this, Bolivar's life changed forever. And even worse, the former Menudo members he spoke to were afraid. They were afraid of what would happen to them if they went on to speak out against him. The way that Bolivar's life was ruined, they didn't want the same thing to happen. So they straight up told him, do not mention my name anymore. But thankfully, in time, other members would start to speak out. One of them being Ralphie Rodriguez, who was very brave and confronted Edgardo in person, exposing him live on the show called The Christina Show. He, alongside his father, would go on to tell the world how Edgardo not only was abusive, but would also have sexual intercourse with the underage members of the band. But you guys, unfortunately, nothing came out of this also. And that is because the host of the show was clearly biased in the situation. And when I say clearly biased, that is my opinion. Because she made Ralphie and the others speaking out against Edgardo seem like they were just saying all these things because they wanted money. It was pretty clear that Christina wanted to help paint this picture that Edgardo was a good man. And she also allowed him to use this opportunity to announce the new members of Menudo at the time, one of which would later on expose Christina and verify my opinions. After the taping, Christina actually went with Edgardo and the rest of the kids to go out to eat. They were clearly friends, which makes her an unreliable moderator of this situation. It was pretty clear by now that Edgardo had connections. And as you heard me mention in the beginning, even those connections were accused of being just as disgusting as he was. In Menudo Forever Young, we get to hear Angelo Garcia's story. He joined Menudo when he was just 11 years old and details a horrifying incident that happened to him. One of Edgardo's associates, who was unnamed, gave him alcohol, and that alcohol contained drugs. This person drugged him and raped him. And in this documentary, Angelo goes into explicit detail of the aftermath. And he would go on to share that it happened several times throughout his career in the band. But one thing Angelo did highlight is that Edgardo Diaz never did anything to him. But again, the people he surrounded himself with were not good people. Another former member who would speak out is Ashley Ruiz. During his time in Menudo, he was known as Ash. In the Peacock documentary Menendez plus Menudo, Boys Betrayed, Ash shared something with Roy. There was this incident where he was at a hotel taking a shower, and once he got out and was getting his things together, he could feel that there was somebody behind him. He initially thought that it was one of the other guys, but when he turned around, he found out that it was Edgardo, and he had this very disturbing look on his face. But thankfully, Ash spoke up for himself in that moment. While Edgardo was trying to gaslight him, Ash shut that down real quick, telling Edgardo that he was not a huge fan of Menudo before he joined. So he only sees Edgardo as just a man. And because of this, he is not afraid to tell anyone if Edgardo ever touches him or anyone else in the band. Another member who spoke out is Ray Reyes, and he was planning on telling everything that happened in Menudo during his time. But then unfortunately, he passed away before he could, leaving his younger brother Raul Reyes to go on to tell his story. And the thing about Raul is he's going to be a significant person in this case against Edgardo. And I'll explain why very soon. During the time of the earlier scandals, Menudo's success began to take a downward turn. But around that same time, something very big happened. Eric and Lyle Menendez took the life of both of their parents, Jose and Kitty Menendez. Now, this took place right after the O.J. Simpson case where he was acquitted for murder. So naturally, the DA was not going to let this one slide. They framed Eric and Lyle as these two boys who killed their parents for financial gain. And they were only using this story of abuse as a way to get away with it, calling what happened to them an abuse excuse. One of the most disgusting things I've ever heard in my life. Not only this, they were also making it so they couldn't use any of the testimonies or evidence backing their claims. And those claims are what their father had did to them all those years. And the DA office did this just to turn around and say there was no evidence that they were abused. They only killed their parents for money. And yeah, there was no evidence because you guys did not allow any of it. So what ended up happening was Eric and Lyle Menendez received life sentences without the possibility of parole.
A while back, I remember telling Lyle and Eric how horrible I felt that they were in jail. And finally, Lyle stopped me and said, "Diane, don't. I'm happier than I've ever been." He feels better living in prison than he did living with his mom and dad. What does that say?
Now, in recent years, there has been a new shred of hope for justice in both tragic stories. As we've seen throughout this video, Roy Rosello has came forward with his story, and he did this because he is currently building a case against Edgardo Diaz. Not only has he gotten in contact with former members of Menudo and their families, such as Ash Ruiz and Raul Reyes, who, mind you, was actually an eyewitness of what Edgardo Diaz did to Roy. But Roy also reached out to Bolivar Arellano and the former music producer of Menudo. His name was Papaheli, and he even went on to say that Edgardo was not successful because he was a genius marketer.
En mi opinión, el éxito que tuvo Edgardo no es el resultado de que él sea un genio de mercadeo. El secreto de su éxito es que él tiene el mismo gusto y el mismo líbido de una nena de 12 años.
Now, not only would this help put Edgardo in prison, which is a place that is far more better than where he actually belongs, but it could also help Lyle and Eric Menendez turn over their conviction by proving to the court what their father had done to them all those years was true, and their actions at that time were a result of that traumatic experience. And to that, I say I only hope for the best. Now, considering everything that has come out in the last few years, it is very clear that there has been a huge problem across the board. And one that we know is not just happening to people who are famous. As I said, there is a special place for people like Jose Menendez and Edgardo Diaz. People who take advantage of children and other people the way that they did. This was honestly a disturbing rabbit hole to go down. And unfortunately, I have a strong feeling that it goes even deeper than this. Now, before I end this video, I want to address some of the comments that I saw in my last one. Although it is important for survivors to share their stories, it is important to create a safe space for them to do that. When you experience something that is traumatizing like this, it is terrifying to relive it. And not only reliving it, but also confronting the person who did it to you. So my opinion is that it's important to not bully them and to, again, give them that safe space. Another thing I see in the comments is that this is old news. You guys, I'm not a reporter. This is not to be the first person to break news. I'm just talking about something I found out. And yes, while there is a large population of people who knew about Menudo, there's also a large population of people who didn't. And considering how relevant this is today, as it can help the Eric and Lyle Menendez case, as well as put Edgardo Diaz in jail, I think it's pretty important to spread awareness on it now more than ever. And the last thing is to the people who keep on saying that they're all gay now because they were SA'd. Respectfully, what you're saying is inaccurate, unfair, and downright disrespectful. While there have been instances where people have said this is what happened to them, you can't use that as an umbrella to speculate on other people's sexual orientation, or the reason why they have this preference. If they never said that was the reason, then you have no place to claim it is. With that being said, thank you guys for making it to the end of this really long deep dive. I want to see who made it to the end, so make sure you drop Menudo and Menendez in the comment section.